What's up YouTube? Welcome to another map analysis video. Today we're looking at Breach 2.0, at least that's what it's called in the workshop, not in-game of course. It's not even really 2.0 because this is the third significant revision I can remember of this particular map, so the authors keep coming back to it. I highly recommend you check them out on Twitter and stuff. Obviously there's all their socials and whatnot will be in the description, and in particular, I would like to say that this map, with its changes, definitely seems pretty interesting in terms of like what kinds of things could happen if, you know, pro adoption was seen. There's a lot of tactical potential on this map, but it has its own sort of foibles, shall we say, that will certainly make the gameplay interesting and specific, but I think it's probably pretty easy to see why the current meta wouldn't map very easily onto it, which is as gracious and nice a way as I can say that maybe the map isn't going to work in the current play. It would need some tweaks to do so. I like the clean aesthetic of Breach, generally speaking. You look around at it, it's got some nice color schemes. It's fairly consistent, feels... it doesn't feel realistic necessarily, but it feels hyper-realistic in the sense that it's not really that different from what you might see. It's just cleaned up and presented in a way that is like, you know, ideal for what we would want out of CS. You're unlikely to ever have any visibility issues on the map, besides maybe some very specific areas where it's just generally darker. Maybe those get addressed, or maybe those are fine, but even then, that's in the hypothetical situation. I haven't had any visibility issues personally. With that being said, let's abandon our homie Banana Bread and take a look at A from T-Spawn. This window is not normally removed. I removed it myself, as well as this one. I popped these two. So this is, obviously there's like this door and stuff here. Most of the time when you leave T-Spawn, it's just a cacophony of Glock shots and knife swipes to remove all of the windows, so keep that in mind. And as evidenced by the utility and the bullet holes and all sorts of other stuff in this particular atrium, I have been experimenting in this area. So there are some bits of glass here in these window frames that have been, you know, sort of popped up. That's obviously supposed to imply that, hey, take a look at this. You can actually throw grenades here. But as a quick demonstration, your grenades pass right through a lot of the stuff here, like a lot of the random bits and bobs, but then they don't pass through others. So it's kind of inconsistent. Like they don't pass through that, which is the sort of window holder, right? And then they don't pass through like some of the stuff that is like the beams or like the support beams or something, like the actual thing that the window is installed into. But they do pass through like that, for example, which is more obvious. So it's probably better. Like, I think it's nice that they pass through some of that stuff in terms of being able to throw grenades, but it's inconsistent and not really easy to intuit because stuff that is bigger and thicker, you pass right through totally fine. Stuff that's really thin and minuscule and something you would never think, like even, you know, you think of like the railings on overpass and stuff where grenades go right through them and whatnot. Yeah, that sort of thing is weird. All that to say, we do indeed have a little bit of utility you can throw here. If you want a bit of a, you can imagine this is similar to the mid, sort of top of mid smoke for Mirage that T's used to scale towards window. It's very, very similar. So first things first, you put yourself between those two pieces of glass or whatever you, and you're gonna hold your mouse up until it's aligned with this little washer thing that's sticking out of that pipe. But you want to keep yourself relatively middle. You know, you can do it a little bit to the left or whatever. And so, you know, make sure that your crosshairs are about there. It's fairly loosey-goosey. You jump throw, and it's going to give you a little bit of cover. So when you're scaling out here, you only have to worry about the tangent sign there. And, you know, as you're popping your way out, the more left you throw it, obviously the more there's a potential for a gap and stuff. But for now, like I can't really see anything over there. I would have to commit pretty hard to come over here. You might even use this at a high level to bait out the utility. If we rethrow that smoke, what we'll see here is, like, say I'm scoped up. You know, this is my POV as an opper. I can't really see anything. I would have to like keep watch over there. I have to commit to support a rifler, or if I am the opper indeed, and I'm over here, I'd have to be over in this angle looking at this area, something like that. And then meanwhile, you've got, you know, this position over here. You know, again, maybe you throw it a little bit further out, but that's one angle that you have at your disposal. So that's the bit of utility I would throw pretty much every game if I'm going A, because this position otherwise is very, very difficult to scale out and attack CT positions. By itself, I mean, even with that utility, you're going to want to be generous with it, or rather, you're going to want to hold off on using it, I should say, because if you just look at this position here, one Molotov closes this out, one smoke closes this out. It's like overpass the entrance to playground, except you have no cover once you smoke through it, flash through it, etc. You are instantly in for a gunfight. So you're going to need a counter flash and stuff. It is a utility battle, but it's not as obvious as you might think initially. You might think, oh, look at this. This is not a utility battle. This is no Inferno banana. It actually is going to be. It's just there's a lot more variance. There's a lot more freedom there. So yeah, be warned. This is also very bangable, so you got to be careful of that. You can see all my bullets went through there. Mostly, if you're trying to do damage, it's going to be op shots through there. This is where CTs can be, that little HE smoke and or HE stain. This HE stain is for Ts, so that's after 10 seconds of holding W. Most spawns will be thereabouts. So keep that in mind because you do not beat the CTs here pretty much ever. As a result, they can already be set up even if you don't see any utility, right? So, I imagine if you were trying to take fast A control, fast A long control, you'd have somebody chucking flashbangs and getting owned by the cover that I was mentioning earlier. Yeah, so... they check the flashbangs over. Maybe they find more dedicated positions to throw them from, similar to like the Dust 2 long pushes and stuff that we've seen from years on end now. So that's sort of something that you'd be imagining. But if you're just trying to be, Pug team number 69, yeah, the CTs are probably going to run ragged over you because, like, the fact that they can just throw an incendiary grenade and then hold this angle, or throw a smoke grenade and hold the angle, it's so much easier for the CTs to handle this territory than it is for the Ts to take it out. Like, you saw right there, in order for the Ts to compete with that area, it's just like Mirage mid. You need a smoke. You need a couple flashes. You need maybe some other lineups in there for, some smoke that will hit the top of these stairs that I wasn't able to find just yet. So it's stuff like that where you're definitely going to need to keep watch for that stuff. However, I'm pretty sure, yeah, you can pop these, and apparently they pop all at once. So that's kind of neat. So you can throw flashbangs out. That's obviously not going to be doing it many favors. But you can throw flashbangs through there. That's going to go too deep to blind anybody holding top of stairs. But, you imagine there's a couple of more like sporadic, spontaneous, spur of the moment utility bits that the Ts can throw. It's just really difficult to do it any other way. Like maybe you can even find like a poor man's version of what I was just trying to smoke off earlier, by bouncing it off of this, and maybe then it's like something that you can replicate relatively easily, like maybe you just underhand it or something and then like step out through it, or I don't know. There's a couple of things you could do, but the most surefire way that I've spotted so far is definitely the more like throw stuff, like the more lineup oriented stuff. So we'll take a look at mid. So mid is really interesting. It's got a lot of verticality, a lot of different spots that you can hide in. Unfortunately, you can't stick yourself underneath the stairs. I would actually suggest maybe the mappers like block this off in general because it's a bit misleading. And I mean, maybe it is useful in some niche cases where like maybe if I throw a Molotov over there, it might hurt me up here. It does, but only in a specific area. It also spreads and breaks glass, so that's great. This map is like basically made of glass, so that doesn't really surprise me. But mid is pretty important. So this is the CT timing for after 10 seconds, and this is the T timing after 10 seconds, assuming that you've burst through this window and then taken a left. So you got to keep that in mind. That is, of course, the like B-side mid connector, like the highway, or I don't even know what you'd call it, alleyway. So that's if you're going alley. If you're going to through halls or upstairs, as the call out is, you'd be about here as a T. It's pretty interesting because this window is popped now. So if you aim yourself, if you stick yourself into this area and you keep your crosshair relatively in line with that tangent sign and then aim just a little bit above the window, it sounds more complicated than it is. A little bit of practice gets you every single time. This smokes pretty much instantaneously. It plumes instantaneously to smoke out the window. So that's something that not a lot of people know on this map, but if you do it, obviously it makes it a lot easier for you to take control. And then of course you're just going to go here and like middle click some flashes and stuff to blind people lower. If you wanted to do something a little bit more elaborate, you might middle click a flash over here. And then I'm sure you could find some angle, like if I aimed that a little bit to the right, then that would probably work really well to blind anybody over here. Ideally you'd even find something that is like even more of a pop flash. So you might like aim, further back maybe, and then do like a run throw. That's a little bit more deep. I don't know. There could be something that you could do here to like blind an opper that's holding here if they're not over here because they're smoked or something like that. But the important part is because of all of this, right? And there's like glass here, but it's not actually, easy for you to bang through. Like technically it's spammable, but it's not that much damage leaks through, at least in my experience. What's really cool is if you are trying to do a B split of some kind, you basically need 2 contact points into B, which is another thing that a lot of like this map basically requires a lot of knowledge and research and homework done by the Ts in order to deal with CTs. That's probably the main issue that a lot of people have with it right now, is that CTs have, like, they can run roughshod over the whole map. They've got a lot of, maybe not incidental map control, but their map control goes farther. Like, the Ts are playing a rigged game in that respect. And as a result of being able to hold mid and all this other stuff, like, basically you need to find these lineups and you need to develop these strategies, and that's pretty much the only way that you're going to get anywhere as a T side, whereas the CTs don't really need to do that. They just need to wait for you to come to them. So I don't know if that's necessarily a horrendous thing, because I think people are just generally very sensitive to CT-sided maps, broadly speaking, but it does mean that maybe like the CTs don't need to do that many interesting decisions in order to find success, and that would be a critique you could levy at the map, broadly speaking. In my experience, it's really easy for the Ts to feel aimless and hopeless, because everywhere they go, they just get owned. And that's probably not going to be very good for the map's playtime or adoption rate. But that's probably also fine. Like, in my opinion, I think it's fine if we have more CT-sided maps, as long as the meta itself is not what's contributing to that. Like, the game state itself is not what's contributing to that. It's a deliberate decision by the designers of a map. That makes more sense than suddenly you're dealing with something where it's just like, you know, I personally didn't take that much issue with like the nukes being, you know, 16 to, or what was it, like 11-4 T sides, or 11-4 CT sides rather, stuff like that. So, but yeah, generally speaking, this map does have a lot of that. So I was in the middle of talking about a B split. If you do get this window smoked, right, you send somebody up here to maybe contest with that, and then they're going to sit here and you're going to say like, hey, all right, smoke the window. Let's you know, see what we can do here. Once this window is smoked, you basically make the CTs like expect somebody to pop over here. If you never do that, if instead you're a lurk player playing from this middle position while your team is walking up here, then suddenly, like, as they're walking up, somebody would have to be over there exposed to the upstairs apps lurk or whatever, halls lurk. They could be like the A rotator or something, also exposing themselves if they're going to go all the way underpass or whatever. Meanwhile, you can basically just freely walk over here with 2 people, pop up in the doors, and then see yourself the B site. And suddenly now you can start pincing with like whoever's over here. Now, the one problem is that this is basically mandatory in my eyes. I can't really imagine a team successfully taking B without either having already flanked through CT spawn, which is over here, to take the CT position to B, or having the connector area, basically the door area, in addition to attacking from B main. You basically need 2 points of contact because of how expansive the B site is. So let's show that off a little bit. As you are coming out over here, you'll notice that the B site, comparatively to A and also to mid, not really a whole lot going on in terms of utility that you can throw, which kind of contributes to this problem. But again, utility is like an acquired taste, right? So you can do your flashes. You can try to figure out what you're doing here. So this is where you can be after 10 seconds. And so don't get me wrong, B rushes can and have been successful on this map, but because of all of the different territory that you have as a CT, like you can be on the site after 10 seconds, right? You're already here when the Ts are here. So it's not even like fair. You can be in so many different positions. So just being able to like pull off a B rush or whatever, you kind of have to catch the CTs off guard, or you have to like hit really good flashbangs or whatever. Like a take of the B site really doesn't look too utility focused. Unless you find some particularly good lineups, right? You kind of have to like scale up these data centers separately, but as you make this cross, you have to deal with that. You have to deal with anybody in mid if you haven't taken mid control, right? This is like I was saying earlier, you need door control in order to really make this work. That's the main reason why is because you don't want to get backstabbed while you're trying to clear this site with all the different angles and things that you have to worry about, right? Like CTs can be tucked away in here. CTs can be holding here for you to enter. They can obviously be holding onto the site like this position here. They can be, I don't know, they can be on top. You know, you can scale up pretty easily. You can take like a fight over in this angle and then, you know, maybe dance around this pillar, trying to like do stuff and then, you know, drop and you know, take another fight or drop behind this maybe. So that could definitely be a possibility. So there's all sorts of different things that you can do. You can obviously hold a much more passive angle like this, fall back, and then, you know, scale yourself down or like wait to flash yourself back in or whatever. There's a lot of different decisions that you can make. However, obviously, there's only so many positions 2 people can be, assuming you have 2 people on B at the point in time that that's happening. So that's also another thing that you have to keep in mind. With that being said, it's obviously, there's a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of interesting angles you can take. I kind of like the fact that there's so many places that the CTs could burrow in. Obviously, the CTs might themselves break these windows and like open the door and stuff. The audio cues don't really matter that much. I think the window being here is more like the glass being here is more like a combination with the door as a way to say they definitely went B because they're breaking the glass, like somebody's here. So it's like a multi-layered step. I don't know if it really needs the hearing stuff necessarily, but whatever, that's fine. Meanwhile, if you're going to talk about the A-bomb site, which I haven't really showed too much yet, once you're coming up here, this is it. Like, there's not really a whole lot of cover. There's not really a whole lot of places CTs can be playing from. You know, you might have somebody buried in a one and done angle, something like this, but that's pretty unlikely. Instead, what I would imagine is the CTs are going to be playing around these angles and over here at a high level. Like, I've seen people play really silly positions in this area, but this is one of the reasons why you want to play around the tangent site, where you want to like fight around A long, similar to, you know, Dust 2, obviously. You want to be able to do stuff like this. If you're trying to play a more defensive position, maybe this, dance around this middle piece while you get cover from spawn, something like that. Your life is made a lot harder as a CT if the Ts have successfully taken mid control, which I haven't really figured out how you would do in like a theoretical world. Like, you'd have to smoke that window off, obviously. And once you do that, like, okay, now you've smoked window. What are you going to do beyond that? Like, are you going to, you know, do that flashbang that I was trying to throw earlier where you're like, okay, I've done a flashbang and try to like, blind somebody over here. That's a pretty good one, actually. Not too bad. Hard to replicate, obviously. But okay, you know, you smoke things, you flash things. You're like there's pretty much, you didn't need instantaneous reaction time to look away from that, so that's pretty much not going to happen. But again, that's hard to replicate. Find a flash that's like that. Okay, great. Now what we have access to is some way to like break this area without losing too many people. I guess you could probably throw like a Molotov in the back area of this and then smoke it off, so like you're isolating them. That's probably possible as a T. So there's definitely ways that you could do, you could make this approach, but I would imagine that it would involve similarly to like, okay, you're threatening the B area, right? So you want to have like a lurk over here, you know, trying to burrow in ideally in this position so that the CTs can't really leave comfortably. Like, you can be sitting back here, like this off angle. You can't really duck in necessarily. You could obviously sit in front of this box, but well, actually, I assumed it would be bangable, but because it's, you know, made of wood. However, something in there is pretty fucking tough, so maybe not. You can obviously be sitting back here and like lurking too. Like, there's a lot of places you can lurk as a T on this map, and especially towards B. So that's something that you can also remember. Obviously, you can be up here. I'm not really sure what the utility of this position is. It seems like it's a good way to get your legs shot out from under you. But I've seen some people find success there. Okay, that's fine, I guess. Yeah, so anyway, I would imagine you would want a B-lurk to burrow in there while 2 people scale up mid with this smoked from the guy in halls and your last guy lurking A, probably. And then you're trying to sort of feel out the whole map. CTs are doing their thing, right? Taking their map control and trying to force out a bunch of utility before you get to the site for a take. But yeah, assuming this is smoked, right, the window, and then you find some way to like, you know, pressure this area, you would probably want people to be, you know, coming up the stairs from the alleyway position, right? And then if you hear the door or the glass break or whatever, you know the B rotators are coming to support mid, which is another angle that's pretty useful for the glass there. Not that it really matters that much. And then obviously, like, as you take this position, you can go anywhere here. It seems like you'd be biased towards A, but you could go A from CT spawn, you could go B from CT. There's a number of different things that you could do. So there is a healthy amount of choice and a healthy amount of decisions you can make as a T, but it does feel like maybe the decisions that the CTs will most commonly make that will give them the most advantage is, generally speaking, going to be easier to make those decisions. It's going to be easier to pull off those actions. So that's probably the only thing that I would say about this map that kind of rubs me the wrong way, is the fact that really at the end of the day, I have to put in way less effort for a shift on the CT side than I do for a shift on the T side. You know, on the T side, I have to call complex strategies. I have to, you know, micromanage players. I have to send them in different areas. I have to make sure that they know how to throw like the little bits of utility that I've already scouted, or I have to do that myself maybe. You know, so I've obviously, just based on the fact that I know the smoke, you know, I'd probably be the guy who's like always lurking apps, right? Well, I always say that I always know the smoke, but oh, actually that works great. So I'm the guy always lurking apps. I'm throwing the flashes. I'm smoking this off. I'm trying to like find some pressure and stuff. Great. You know, maybe the other, somebody over here, I don't know, like if they can learn. This smoke is a lot harder to learn, I feel like. It's not really that difficult, but it's just like, do I really have to remember that? So yeah, there's a lot of complexity there, I guess. But broadly speaking, it's probably fine. Like another thing that I guess I haven't really talked about is like the fact that this window exists means that you can, you know, support your A players by flashing this out over here. If you end up taking mid control, it's a more niche situation, but it's something that you can do. And with that being said, I mean, what else is there to say? Like broadly speaking, if you're going to try to take this map, you definitely need 2 points of contact onto the site. I think that's just inarguable, unless you're really good at hitting your shots. You know, Basalt had a similar problem to this map now. In retrospect, I'm able to identify that, where you needed a couple points of contact, and those points of contact were much easier for the CTs to hold. Otherwise, you just couldn't stage an attack on anything successfully. I think with Basalt, it's a little bit easier to argue or find ways to do it from just one point of contact, because you can do so many different smokes. You can do so many different lineups. But in this map, yeah, you're looking at a B site that's really hard to do utility in. And, you know, the A site, okay, that's separate. You can definitely find some stuff. There's almost certainly a bunch of smokes that you could throw from like this long position. Smoke this off, isolate people who are inside the site, and then burst on, pop on with people coming in from mid, people coming in from this area, or even without the mid potentially, although I would still argue against that. I would caution against that. So yeah, ultimately, CT rotations plus the power that is intrinsic to their choke points means that they can lock T's out of control, even with utility taken into account, with ease, right? And so you kind of need to know your chops on the T side in order to find a lot of success on this map. However, on the CT side, it's a little bit easier, right? So not really the end of the world necessarily. Again, I don't think this is a horrible idea. I think at a really high level, pros would actually find very effective T sides that CTs would need to adapt to, right? CTs would need to be the ones on the back foot then once these strategies became ubiquitous. We think of the Mirage sort of window smoke from spawn and the top mid smoke from spawn and stuff. Like these things, if you imagine they didn't exist or were not possible, suddenly the map feels really, really CT sided, right? So it could very well be the case that Breach is similar and you just eventually would find something. And as a result, I find it really difficult to argue that the map should be changed fundamentally in a structural manner. I do think that maybe there's a lot of areas that feel less useful, like the the room I just went through. I don't know what the purpose of that is, besides maybe scaling into an attack if you take mid control and you're trying to like pincer somebody from CT side. But that's already so difficult for the CTs to deal with that I don't think you'd really get much or lose much by removing that room necessarily. I do like that the map feels lived in though. Like that's actually one thing that I would say is maybe it's not a very apt critique of other maps because maybe people don't care about that. But, I talked earlier about it being hyper realistic. And I do feel like maybe while we're looking at stuff like this, there's foosball tables here. What are you going to do with these foosball tables? Are you going to, can I eat them? It doesn't look like it. I can, that is physics enabled, so I can shoot that. That's great. But that's about it, So what can I even really do with that? Well, obviously it's not really there for gameplay, but it does allow you to maybe have like a cheeky little save angle. It does allow you to just have something to look at, right? And generally speaking, I think, a lot of the cases that people are going to be surprised about is like, why would you ever include this area or this part of the map in the game if it's not really that useful? Like the side room I ran through earlier, or, what is this, an electrical room or something? And then, you obviously have that foosball area or what have you. I actually think it adds to the map's character. Maybe there's a few areas like out here or out on a long or something that feel like they could use a little bit more work or a little bit more of that, right? It's like stuff that's not super gameplay oriented, but might still be useful for the purposes of adding character to the map. Now, again, maybe that also contributes to like FPS drops or something. So who knows? It's always a tricky balance. But I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the attention to detail. And I appreciate that this map, while initially doesn't feel super amazing on the T side, unless you're willing to put in the work to learn some things about it, compared to how easy it is to learn things on the CT side where it's much more intuitive, I also think that that's totally acceptable and that it probably wouldn't even be true if the game, if the pro scene adopted the map and if the game gave it enough time to, and the community gave it enough time to allow it the necessary aspects, right? So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. I think it's totally acceptable in its current state to at least practice and try. And I do think that the big thing that's going to make you more amenable to maps like Breach is if you imagine the existing maps that we already know about without how much attention to detail the pros went to make sure that we had the ability to play playable T-sides, right? So just another thing to mention, I suppose. But I'm interested in seeing if this map does get any updates, what they will be, and broadly speaking, how people like it and what people thought of it. So obviously, if you had some thoughts on Breach, leave a note for the developers of the map to take a look at in the comments below. And I'll catch you guys on the next map analysis video, which obviously we all know what it's going to be. There's only one left for this rotation, so stay tuned.